My name is Heather, and I'm 31 years old. For 11 years, I carried the crushing weight of guilt for an accident that left my sister Rachel permanently disabled. My parents never let me forget that it was my fault. That one moment of poor judgment had destroyed her life. Every family dinner, every holiday, every birthday was a reminder of my unforgivable mistake. Then last year, I discovered the police report that changed everything. The truth had been buried for over a decade, and it wasn't what anyone had told me. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to hear more stories about finding truth after years of deception. Rachel and I were always close growing up, despite the 5-year age gap between us. As the older sister, I took my role seriously. I braided her hair for school, helped with homework, and chased away the neighborhood kids who teased her for her braces. We shared secrets under blanket forts and made pinky promises that we solemnly swore never to break. But our family dynamic wasn't perfect. My parents, Margaret and Robert, had always held me to impossibly high standards while Rachel seemed to do no wrong in their eyes. "Heather, why can't you be more like your sister?" became a refrain I heard throughout high school. While I struggled with math and science, Rachel was a natural, bringing home perfect report cards that earned places of honor on the refrigerator. My B+ in advanced chemistry was met with, "You could have done better if you'd studied harder," while Rachel's achievements were celebrated with ice cream and new clothes. By the time I turned 20, I had started my second year at the local community college. I lived at home to save money, though the arrangement was becoming increasingly stifling. My parents monitored my comings and goings like I was still 16, questioning who I was with and what time I'd be home. Meanwhile, 15-year-old Rachel was thriving in high school, honor roll student, junior varsity volleyball team, and lead in the school play. "Rachel has focus," my mother would say. "She knows what she wants and works for it. You've always been so scattered, Heather." What my parents didn't see was how Rachel was changing. The sweet, rule-following girl was giving way to a teenager desperate to fit in with the popular crowd. She started wearing makeup when she left the house, changing into more revealing clothes in the school bathroom. She'd confide in me about crushes on boys our parents would never approve of, boys with motorcycles and tattoos, who were definitely not on the honor roll. "Please don't tell Mom and Dad," she'd beg. "They'd never understand." And I kept her secrets. Maybe it was because I remembered what it was like to be 15 and feel trapped by parental expectations. Or maybe I just wanted to be the cool older sister, the confidant Rachel could trust when she couldn't trust our parents. Either way, I became her accomplice in small rebellions, covering for her when she stayed out a little later than allowed, lending her my mascara and perfume. The weekend of the accident, our parents were celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary with a trip to a bed and breakfast 3 hours away. They'd be gone from Friday afternoon until Sunday evening, leaving me in charge of Rachel. "Remember, no friends over, no parties, and absolutely no boys," my father instructed sternly as they loaded their overnight bags into the car. "Rachel has volleyball practice tomorrow morning. Make sure she's there by 9. "I'm not a child, Dad," Rachel had protested. "I know when my practice is." "We're counting on you, Heather," my mother added, ignoring Rachel's comment. "Don't let us down." After they drove away, Rachel immediately turned to me with pleading eyes. "Cassidy Miller is having a party tonight. Everyone from school will be there." "No way," I said, remembering my father's warnings. "Mom and Dad would kill me. They'll never know. I'll be home by 11, I promise." "Please, Heather. This is important." Her eyes filled with tears. Tyler Sullivan might be there. Tyler Sullivan was the latest object of Rachel's affection, a junior with perfect hair who barely knew she existed. I recognized the longing in her voice, because I'd felt it myself at her age. Rachel, I can't. It's too risky. You got to go to parties when you were my age, she argued. Remember when you snuck out to go to Brad Wheeler's graduation party? Mom and Dad never found out about that. I winced, regretting ever sharing that story with her. That was different. How? Because it was you. Her voice grew cold. You know what? Forget it. I'll just tell Mom and Dad about how you let Jason sleep over last month, when they were visiting Grandma. My stomach dropped. Jason had indeed stayed over, completely innocently as we'd fallen asleep studying, but my parents would never believe that. Their golden child Rachel would be believed over me any day. That's blackmail, I said weakly. She shrugged, but softened her approach. I'm not asking to do anything you didn't do. I'll text you when I get there and when I'm leaving. I'll be super careful. I stared at my sister, this girl on the cusp of womanhood, desperate for independence, but still so young. Against my better judgment, I relented. Home by 11, I said firmly. Not 11:01. 11 sharp. And you text me every hour so I know you're okay. Rachel squealed and threw her arms around me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're the best sister ever. And no drinking, I added sternly. I mean it, Rach. Not a drop. I would never, she said, looking offended that I'd even suggest it. You know I'm not like that. As I watched her race upstairs to pick out an outfit, I pushed down my uneasiness. What was the worst that could happen? She'd go to a party, talk to a boy, maybe share an awkward dance, and come home with a story to tell. It seemed harmless enough. That decision, that one moment of weakness, would haunt me for the next 11 years of my life. That evening, I settled into our living room with my textbooks spread across the coffee table. My biology midterm was on Monday, and I needed to review cellular respiration one more time. Rachel had left for the party at 8, wearing jeans and a top she'd borrowed from my closet, nothing too revealing, which had made me feel marginally better about the whole situation. Remember, 11 o'clock. I'd reminded her as she headed out the door. I know. Stop worrying so much. She'd flashed me a bright smile. Love you, sis. As promised, she texted when she arrived at Cassidy's house. I tried to focus on my studying, but found myself checking the clock every 15 minutes. At 9, she texted that the party was so boring but Tyler had said hi to her. At 10, another text, having fun. Don't wait up. That last message made me uneasy. I texted back immediately, remember, home by 11. No exceptions. No response. By 11:15, my stomach was in knots. I called Rachel's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. By 11:30, I was pacing the living room, debating whether to drive to Cassidy's house. That's when my phone finally rang. My relief at seeing Rachel's name on the screen quickly evaporated when I heard the panicked voice on the other end. Heather. It's Megan, Rachel's friend. There's been an accident. Rachel got hit by a car. The ambulance is taking her to Memorial Hospital right now. The world tilted sideways. I don't remember grabbing my keys or driving to the hospital. I only remember the crushing fear and the mantra repeating in my head, please let her be okay, please let her be okay. The emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. When I finally found someone who could tell me about Rachel, the news was devastating. She's in surgery, a nurse explained gently. She sustained significant trauma, including head injuries. The doctors are doing everything they can. I sank into a hard plastic chair, my legs no longer able to support me. This couldn't be happening. Not to Rachel. Not to my little sister, who had just been laughing and borrowing my clothes a few hours ago. I had to call my parents. With trembling fingers, I dialed my father's cell phone. Heather. It's almost midnight. Is everything okay? His voice was groggy with sleep. Dad, it's Rachel, I choked out. There's been an accident. She's at Memorial Hospital. She got hit by a car. The silence that followed was brief but deafening. What happened? His voice had transformed into something sharp and cold. I don't know all the details. Her friend called me. She's in surgery right now. They said it's serious. We're on our way. Don't leave her, do you understand me? Don't you dare leave her side. The line went dead. I sat in that waiting room for 3 hours before my parents burst through the doors, wild-eyed and disheveled from their frantic drive back to town. By then, Rachel was out of surgery and in the ICU. The doctor had spoken to me briefly. Severe brain trauma, multiple fractures, internal bleeding that they'd managed to control. She was stable but critical. When my parents saw me, there was no relief in their eyes, no comfort sought or offered. Instead, my mother's face contorted with rage. How could you let this happen? She hissed, her voice low but vibrating with fury. We trusted you. We trusted you with the most precious thing in our lives. I didn't. I don't know what happened, I stammered. She was supposed to be home by 11. Home by 11. My father's voice rose, drawing stares from others in the waiting room. Where was she supposed to be before 11? The truth came out in halting fragments. The party. My permission. The texts. With each detail, my parents' expressions hardened further. She wasn't supposed to be at any party, my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. You deliberately went against our wishes. A police officer approached us then, introducing himself as Officer Barrett. He had been one of the first responders at the scene. Your daughter was crossing Palmer Street when she was struck by a vehicle, he explained. The driver remained at the scene and called 911 immediately. He doesn't appear to have been speeding or under the influence, but we're still investigating. Palmer Street. I repeated, confused. That's nowhere near Cassidy's house. My parents ignored my comment, focusing instead on questioning the officer about Rachel's condition and the details of the accident. When the doctor called them in to see Rachel, they followed without a backward glance at me. I wasn't allowed into Rachel's room that night. My mother emerged briefly to tell me to go home and feed the cat, her voice flat and her eyes refusing to meet mine. The unspoken message was clear: you've done enough damage. I spent that first night alone in the hospital parking lot, unable to bring myself to drive home. As dawn broke over the horizon, I finally allowed myself to cry, great heaving sobs that left me gasping for air. I had made a terrible mistake, and my sister was paying the price. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of my purgatory, a guilt I would carry for over a decade before discovering the truth. Rachel survived, but she was not the same. The vibrant, quick-witted girl who could solve complex equations in her head and spike a volleyball with perfect precision was gone. In her place was a stranger who had to relearn how to speak, how to feed herself, how to navigate a world that was now accessible only by wheelchair. The doctors called her recovery remarkable given the severity of her injuries. I called it a daily reminder of my failure. My parents didn't call it anything, they simply stopped addressing me directly altogether. 2 weeks after the accident, I moved out of my parents' house and into a tiny studio apartment near campus. It wasn't a decision so much as an eviction, not in words, but in cold shoulders and closed doors. My mother would turn away when I entered a room. My father would speak about me in the third person, as if I weren't standing right there. "Tell her to bring Rachel's books when she comes tomorrow," he'd say to my mother while I stood in the doorway of Rachel's hospital room. I visited Rachel every day, despite the Arctic chill of my parents' presence. I'd bring her favorite magazines, read to her when her vision was too blurry to read herself, brush her hair which had been partially shaved for the surgeries. She didn't blame me, at least not verbally, but there was a new distance between us that felt uncrossable. "I'm so sorry, Rachel," I whispered one afternoon when we were briefly alone. "I should never have let you go to that party." She looked at me with eyes that seemed older than her 15 years. "It's not your fault," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. It was the first time she'd spoken in complete sentences since the accident, and my heart leapt at the progress. Then my mother returned with a nurse, saw us talking, and quickly interrupted. "Rachel needs her rest. You should go." As the months passed, Rachel slowly improved. She regained most of her speech, though she sometimes struggled to find words. Physical therapy helped her regain some function in her left side, but the right remained stubbornly unresponsive. The doctors explained there had been damage to the motor cortex on the left side of her brain. She would likely never walk unassisted again. My parents transformed their home into a shrine to Rachel's recovery. The living room became a therapy space with exercise equipment and adaptive devices. My father took early retirement to become her full-time caregiver. My mother juggled her job as an accountant with medical appointments and support group meetings. There was no room in their lives for anything else, especially not for the daughter they blamed for this tragedy. I put my education on hold, taking a job as a receptionist at a dental office to pay my bills. Every extra dollar went into a savings account labeled Rachel's Fund. I wasn't sure what it would be used for, maybe a specialized wheelchair, maybe a future treatment not covered by insurance, but it felt like the only tangible way I could help. Holidays were exercises in emotional endurance. I would arrive with carefully chosen gifts, and leave with barely a word spoken directly to me. Rachel would try to include me in conversations, but my parents would redirect her attention elsewhere. The message was clear: I was tolerated, not welcomed. "You know they're still angry," Rachel told me during a rare moment alone 3 years after the accident. She was 18 now, technically an adult, though her injuries had frozen aspects of her development. "They don't talk about you when you're not here either." "It's okay," I lied. "I understand." "I don't think it's fair," she said, struggling with her words as she often did when upset. "The accident, it wasn't. I mean, I chose to go." Before she could continue, my mother appeared with Rachel's medication. The conversation ended, as they always did, with my departure. 5 years after the accident, I met Brandon. He was kind and patient, interested in my stories and my dreams. For a few months, I allowed myself to believe that I could have a normal life, maybe even happiness. Then came the night when I tried to explain why I couldn't invite him to Thanksgiving dinner. "My family is complicated," I began. "Everyone's family is complicated," he said with a smile. "I'm sure they're not that bad." So I told him everything. The party. The accident. The years of blame and silent punishment. "That's not complicated, Heather. That's abuse," he said quietly. "You made a mistake that any sister might make. You didn't cause the accident." His words, meant to comfort, only highlighted how warped my perception had become. I'd internalized my parents' narrative so completely that I couldn't separate my poor judgment from the random tragedy that followed. "You don't understand," I insisted. "If I hadn't let her go, then something else might have happened. Or nothing might have happened." You can't know, and you can't keep punishing yourself forever. But I could, and I did. When Brandon pushed me to set boundaries with my family, I ended the relationship instead. I wasn't ready to challenge the story that had defined the last 5 years of my life. The pattern continued. Jobs that I left when they interfered with Rachel's appointments. Relationships that faltered when I couldn't explain why I disappeared for days around holidays or family anniversaries. Friends who drifted away when I cancelled plans last minute because Rachel needed me. Through it all, Rachel herself was changing. The initial gratitude for her survival gave way to depression as she confronted the permanence of her limitations. She'd watch her former classmates go to college, get married, start careers, while she remained largely dependent on our parents. Sometimes I wish the car had just killed me, she confessed on her 21st birthday, after my parents had gone to bed and we shared a forbidden glass of wine. I'm so tired of being broken. Don't say that, I begged, horrified. Please don't ever say that. Why not? It's true. And then at least no one would blame you anymore. She looked at me with clear eyes. I know what they do to you, Heather. I'm not blind. It was the most direct acknowledgement of my parents' treatment she'd ever made. I didn't know how to respond. I stay because of you, I finally said. Not because of them. As the 10th anniversary of the accident approached, my mother organized a celebration of life event at their church. It was framed as a thank you to everyone who had supported Rachel's recovery, but it felt more like the marking of a martyrdom, both Rachel's and my parents'. I was assigned to pick up the cake and arrange the food table. Not to speak, not to be acknowledged in the program, just to serve a function and remain in the background. As I watched my father give a tearful speech about the night that changed their lives forever, I thought of the decade of my own life that had passed in a fog of guilt and obligation. I was 30 now, still single, still working a job that barely covered my bills, still rearranging my schedule around my family's needs. Something had to change. I just didn't know what, or how. The answer came from an unexpected source, my new therapist, Dr. Morris. After a particularly difficult family dinner marking the 10th anniversary of the accident, I had finally sought professional help for my depression. Have you ever seen the actual police report from the accident? She asked during our third session. I blinked in surprise. No. Why would I? My parents dealt with all of that. It might provide some closure, she suggested. Sometimes confronting the concrete details can help us process trauma more effectively than relying on second-hand accounts or memory. The idea took root and wouldn't let go. The police report. The official record of what happened that night. Why had I never thought to look at it myself? The process of obtaining the police report was more complicated than I anticipated. There were forms to fill out, identification to provide, and fees to pay. The records clerk at the police station explained that since the accident had involved a minor, some information might be redacted. Still, I persisted. It should be ready in about 2 weeks. The clerk informed me after I'd submitted all the necessary paperwork. We'll call you when it's available for pickup. Those 2 weeks crawled by. I found myself both dreading and longing for what the report might contain. Would it confirm what I'd always believed, that my irresponsible decision had led directly to Rachel's injuries? Or would it offer some new perspective that I couldn't yet imagine? When the call finally came, I requested the afternoon off work. My hands trembled as I drove to the police station, a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. The envelope the clerk handed me seemed simultaneously too thin to contain something so momentous, and too heavy with its potential impact on my life. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I drove to a quiet park across town, found a secluded bench, and sat staring at the sealed envelope for nearly 20 minutes. Whatever was inside couldn't change what had happened to Rachel. It couldn't give her back the life she should have had. So why did it feel so important? Finally, I took a deep breath and broke the seal. The report was several pages long, filled with official terminology, and formatted in sections that weren't immediately intuitive. I skimmed through the basic information, date, time, location, until I reached the narrative section written by Officer Barrett, the same officer who had spoken to us at the hospital that night. As I read, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Victim, minor, female, 15, was crossing Palmer Street at approximately 10:45 p.m. when struck by vehicle. Victim was in company of 3 other minors at time of accident. Blood alcohol content of victim measured at hospital, 0.13%. I read the sentence 3 times, struggling to comprehend. Blood alcohol content 0.13%. Rachel had been drinking heavily. She would have been noticeably intoxicated at that level. I continued reading, my hands now shaking so badly that the papers rustled. According to statements from witnesses, see attached, victim had left a residence on Maple Avenue approximately 30 minutes before accident. Witness statements indicate victim and 3 companions were walking to residence of Tyler Sullivan on Palmer Street when accident occurred. Maple Avenue. That wasn't where Cassidy Miller lived. Cassidy's house was on Orchard Lane, on the complete opposite side of town from Palmer Street. And Tyler Sullivan, the boy Rachel had a crush on, lived nowhere near either location. The witness statements provided more details, painting a picture entirely different from what I'd believed for a decade. Rachel had indeed gone to Cassidy's party initially, but had left around 9:30 p.m. with Tyler Sullivan and 2 other students. They had gone to another, unsupervised party at a house on Maple Avenue where alcohol was freely available. When that party was broken up by police responding to a noise complaint, Rachel and her friends had decided to walk to Tyler's house rather than risk being caught by getting a ride from someone who had been drinking. It was during that walk, on a poorly lit stretch of Palmer Street, that Rachel had been hit by a car driven by a 62-year-old man returning home from his late shift. The driver had swerved to avoid the group of teenagers who were walking in the road rather than on the sidewalk, but had struck Rachel when she stumbled into his path. The police report noted that charges against the driver had been considered, but ultimately not filed, as witness statements consistently indicated that Rachel had unexpectedly veered into the street, and the driver had limited time to react. There was a photocopy of a handwritten statement from Tyler Sullivan attached to the report. His messy teenage scrawl described how Rachel had been acting weird after drinking at the second party, how she had been all over him in a way that made him uncomfortable, and how she had been definitely not walking straight before the accident. I sat in stunned silence as the implications washed over me. Rachel hadn't been where she was supposed to be. She hadn't been doing what she had promised me she would do. She had been drinking heavily, despite her assurances that she wasn't like that. And she had been with Tyler Sullivan, not at Cassidy's party, but in a completely different part of town. The narrative I had accepted for 11 years, that my poor judgment in allowing Rachel to attend a party had directly caused her accident, was fundamentally flawed. Yes, I shouldn't have given her permission against our parents' wishes. But what happened that night went far beyond Rachel simply attending a friend's party, and then having an accident on the way home. She had lied to me. She had made a series of increasingly dangerous decisions that I knew nothing about. She had been intoxicated, walking in the dark with a boy she barely knew, in a part of town she had no reason to be in. And my parents, had they seen this report? Did they know these details? Had they deliberately allowed me to believe I was fully responsible, when the reality was so much more complicated? A cold clarity descended over me. For 11 years, I had shaped my entire life around an untruth. I had accepted punishment for crimes that went far beyond my actual failings. I had carried guilt that wasn't fully mine to bear. I gathered the papers with mechanical precision, returned them to the envelope, and walked back to my car. For the first time in a decade, I felt something other than guilt when thinking about Rachel's accident. I felt anger. I drove directly to my parents' house, the police report on the passenger seat beside me like a loaded weapon. It was Wednesday afternoon, which meant my father would be taking Rachel to physical therapy. My mother, who worked from home most days, would be alone. She opened the door with surprise evident on her face. "Heather, we weren't expecting you today. We need to talk," I said, brushing past her into the house I had once called home. The living room was unchanged, photos of Rachel's accomplishments before the accident, interspersed with inspirational quotes about overcoming adversity. None of my graduation photos, none of my achievements. I had been effectively erased. "I have a work call in 15 minutes, my mother said, checking her watch. "Can this wait?" "No." I pulled the police report from its envelope and laid it on the coffee table. "It's waited 11 years already. That's long enough." Her eyes flicked to the papers, then back to my face, wariness replacing surprise. "What is that?" "The police report from Rachel's accident. The one you and Dad never showed me. The one that says she was drunk that night. The one that says she lied about where she was going and who she was with." Color drained from my mother's face. She lowered herself slowly onto the edge of the sofa, her hand reaching out as if to touch the report, but stopping short. "Where did you get this?" "From the police department. Turns out anyone can request accident reports. You just have to fill out some forms and pay a fee." My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. Did you know she had a blood alcohol level of 0.13% that night? Did you know she left Cassidy's party to go to another party where she got drunk? Did you know she was with Tyler Sullivan, walking to his house, when she got hit? My mother's silence was answer enough. "How long have you known?" I pressed. "We received a copy of the report about a week after the accident," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. "A week? You've known for 11 years that I wasn't completely responsible for what happened, and you still blamed me. You still punished me. You still made me believe I had ruined Rachel's life. You were the adult," my mother said, her voice hardening. "You were supposed to protect her. Instead, you let her go to a party where she could get into that situation." "I made a mistake," I acknowledged, my voice rising. "I should have followed your rules. I should have said no when she asked to go. But everything that happened after she left our house, the drinking, the second party, the walking across town with Tyler, those were Rachel's choices. Choices I knew nothing about. Choices she actively hid from me with lies." "She was 15, my mother shouted, suddenly animated. 15-year-olds make bad choices. That's why they need adults to protect them from themselves. And 20-year-olds don't deserve to have their lives destroyed by guilt for things they couldn't have prevented." I shouted back. "Do you have any idea what you and Dad have done to me? Do you know what it's like to spend 11 years believing you're responsible for crippling your sister? To have your parents look at you like you're a monster? To rearrange your entire life around an obligation born from a lie?" "It wasn't a lie," my mother insisted, though her conviction seemed to waver. "If you hadn't let her go out that night, then she might have snuck out instead," I interrupted. "Or she might have found some other way to make bad decisions. You can't know that, and neither can I. But what I do know is that you and Dad made a choice too. You chose to place all the blame on me instead of acknowledging the complicated truth. What's going on? We both turned to see Rachel in the doorway, her wheelchair positioned at an angle that suggested she'd been there for some time. My father stood behind her, his face darkening as he took in the scene. "What's she doing here?" he asked my mother, jerking his head in my direction without looking at me directly. Even now, he couldn't bring himself to address me. "She found the police report," my mother said quietly. Something flickered across my father's face, surprise, followed by a defensive hardening of his features. So I know the truth," I said, turning to face him fully. "I know Rachel was drunk. I know she lied about where she was going. I know she was with Tyler Sullivan, walking to his house at nearly 11 at night, when she got hit." "Is that true?" Rachel asked, wheeling herself further into the room. Her gaze fixed on the papers on the coffee table. "Can I see that?" "Rachel, you don't need to," my father began. "Yes, I do," she interrupted firmly. "If this is about me, I have a right to know." I handed her the report, watching as she read through it with a furrowed brow. The room was silent except for the sound of papers rustling as she turned the pages. "I don't remember," she finally said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "I don't remember any of this. The second party. Being drunk. Walking with Tyler. It's just gone. The brain injury affected your memory of that night," my father explained gently. "The doctors said that's normal with traumatic events." "But you knew," Rachel said, her gaze shifting between our parents. "You knew and you let Heather think it was all her fault. For 11 years. We were trying to protect you," my mother insisted. "You'd been through enough without having to face the consequences of your actions that night. So you made Heather face them instead." Rachel's voice rose in disbelief. "How is that fair?" "She was responsible for you," my father said stubbornly. "She knew our rules and she broke them. What happened after was a direct result of her poor judgment." "That's not true and you know it," I said, a lifetime of suppressed anger finally breaking free. "What happened was the result of multiple decisions made by multiple people. Yes, I made a mistake. But Rachel made mistakes too. The driver made a mistake. And you and Mom made the biggest mistake of all by spending 11 years destroying our family with blame and secrets and punishment." "We did not destroy this family," my father thundered. "Your sister's accident did that." "No, Dad," Rachel said quietly. "You and Mom did that. You could have helped us heal together. Instead, you turned Heather into a scapegoat and me into a victim who couldn't take responsibility for her own choices." My father stared at Rachel as if seeing her for the first time. "You don't understand what we've been through," he said, his voice breaking. "Watching you struggle every day, knowing how different your life could have been." "And what about Heather's life?" Rachel challenged. "Have you thought about how different her life could have been without carrying guilt that wasn't fully hers?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. "I can't do this anymore," I said finally, gathering the police report and returning it to its envelope. "I've spent 11 years trying to atone for a sin that wasn't entirely mine. I've rearranged my entire life around your punishment. I've accepted your coldness, your blame, your emotional abuse, because I thought I deserved it. But I didn't. And I don't." I walked toward the door, pausing beside Rachel's wheelchair. "I'm sorry for letting you go to that party. I should have followed Mom and Dad's rules. But everything that happened after you left our house, that wasn't my fault. And I can't carry that guilt anymore." "Heather, wait," Rachel called as I reached the door. "Please don't go. Not like this." I turned back, tears blurring my vision. "I love you, Rachel. I always have and I always will. But I need to figure out who I am without this weight on my shoulders. I need to find out what my life looks like when it's not shaped around guilt and obligation. Then let me come with you, Rachel said, surprising everyone in the room. I can't stay here either. Not now that I know what they've done. Rachel, be reasonable, my mother began. I am being reasonable, Rachel interrupted. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. What you did to Heather was wrong. And I was wrong too, for not questioning it, for accepting the story that placed all the blame on her and none on me. She wheeled herself to my side. I want to go with you. Just for a while. I need space to process all of this too. I looked down at my sister, still beautiful despite the scars, still fierce despite her limitations, and felt a surge of love untainted by guilt for the first time in 11 years. Okay, I said simply. Let's go. My father moved to block the door. You can't just take her. She needs her medication, her special equipment. I'm 26 years old, Dad, Rachel said firmly. I'm not a child. I can manage my own care, and I'm choosing to go with Heather right now. For a moment, I thought he might physically prevent us from leaving. Then, with visible effort, he stepped aside. This isn't over, he said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. You're right, I agreed. But whatever comes next, it won't be the same as what came before. That chapter is finished. As I helped Rachel into my car and loaded her wheelchair into the trunk, I felt simultaneously lighter and terrified. 11 years of a familiar, if painful, pattern had been shattered. I had no idea what would replace it. But as we drove away from the house where so much damage had been done under the guise of love, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: the truth, however painful, had finally set me free. Rachel moved into my tiny apartment that same day. It wasn't wheelchair accessible, which meant I had to carry her up and down the stairs whenever she needed to leave, but she insisted it was temporary. We would figure something out. I can't believe I never questioned it, she said that night as we sat at my small kitchen table, eating takeout pizza. All these years, I just accepted their version of what happened. The brain injury affected your memory, I reminded her. And you were 15. Of course you trusted our parents. But I was there, Heather. I made those choices that night. I drank at that party. I went with Tyler. She shook her head in disbelief. I don't remember any of it, but I know myself well enough to know I wasn't kidnapped or forced. I chose to drink. I chose to leave with him. You were a teenager making teenage mistakes, I said gently. The only difference is that your mistakes had consequences most teenagers don't have to face. And you've been paying for my mistakes for 11 years. Her eyes filled with tears. How can you even stand to look at me? I reached across the table and took her hand. Because you're my sister, and I love you. Because what happened wasn't your fault either, not entirely. It was just life. Terrible, random, unfair life. The next few weeks were a crash course in independence for both of us. Rachel had never lived away from our parents since the accident. She had to learn to manage her medications, coordinate her own therapy appointments, and navigate a world that wasn't designed for someone in a wheelchair. I had to learn to be a support system without becoming a caretaker, to help without hovering, to love without sacrificing my own needs. It was a delicate balance that we didn't always get right. 3 weeks after our dramatic exit from our parents' house, Rachel suggested we meet with a therapist together. I think we both have a lot to unpack, she said. And I want to do it right this time. Dr. Simmons specialized in family trauma. Her office was wheelchair accessible, and her manner was direct without being harsh. In our first session, She asked us to describe what had happened from our individual perspectives. When Rachel explained how she had discovered the truth about the accident, and about our parents' deliberate decision to shield her from responsibility, while blaming me, Dr. Simmons asked a question that stopped us both. Rachel, how do you feel about your own role in what happened that night? Rachel was silent for a long moment. I feel guilty, she finally said. Not just about the accident itself, but about letting Heather carry all the blame for so many years. I should have asked questions. I should have stood up for her more. You were injured, I protested. You were dealing with your own trauma. So were you, she countered. But my trauma was visible. Everyone could see my wheelchair, my scars. Your trauma was invisible, which made it easy for everyone, including me, to ignore it. Over the following weeks, Dr. Simmons helped us navigate our complicated feelings about each other, our parents, and the accident that had defined both our lives for over a decade. It wasn't always easy. There were sessions where we both left in tears, raw from excavating wounds that had never properly healed. But there were breakthroughs too. Rachel admitted that she had sometimes resented me for being able-bodied, for having possibilities that were now closed to her. I confessed that I had occasionally resented her for being the center of our family's universe, even as I dedicated my life to supporting her. Resentment doesn't negate love, Dr. Simmons assured us. You can love someone deeply, and still resent aspects of your relationship with them. The key is to acknowledge those feelings rather than burying them. A month after Rachel moved in with me, our mother called. It was the first contact from either of our parents since we'd left. Your father and I have been talking, she said, her voice stiff with pride struggling against regret. We'd like to meet with both of you. To talk. Rachel and I discussed it with Dr. Simmons in our next session. Are you both ready for that conversation? She asked. It might be very difficult. I think we need to have it, Rachel said. Not just for them, but for us. I don't want to carry this anger forever. I was less certain. The wound was still fresh for me, not the accident itself, but the discovery of my parents' deception. Still, I agreed to a meeting on neutral ground, Dr. Simmons' office, with her present as a mediator. The day of the meeting, my stomach was in knots. Rachel seemed calmer, more resolved. She had been making remarkable progress in therapy, both physical and emotional. There was a new strength in her that I admired deeply. When our parents arrived, they looked smaller somehow. My father, once so imposing in his anger, now seemed diminished, aged beyond his years. My mother's eyes were ringed with dark circles, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Dr. Simmons began by establishing ground rules: no interrupting, no personal attacks, focus on feelings rather than accusations. Then she asked each of us to share how the events of the past 11 years had affected us. I spoke first, describing the crushing weight of guilt I had carried, the opportunities one had sacrificed, the relationships I had sabotaged because I believed I didn't deserve happiness. I lost more than a decade of my life to shame, I concluded. And the hardest part is knowing it didn't have to be that way. We could have grieved together, healed together. Instead, you chose to make me the villain in our family story. My father stared at his hands throughout my speech. When it was his turn to speak, he seemed to struggle for words. A man who had always known exactly what to say suddenly finding himself without a script. I needed someone to blame, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. When I saw Rachel in that hospital bed, so broken, so changed, I couldn't bear the randomness of it. I couldn't accept that sometimes terrible things just happen without reason. So I found a reason. I made it make sense by placing the blame on you. He looked up at me then, his eyes wet with tears. It was wrong. I know that now. But at the time, it felt like the only way I could survive the pain. My mother's confession was similarly difficult. We were so focused on what Rachel had lost that we couldn't see what we were taking from you, she admitted. We told ourselves we were protecting Rachel by not confronting her about her choices that night. But really, we were protecting ourselves from having to face the full complexity of what happened. Rachel spoke last, addressing our parents with a clarity and confidence I had rarely seen from her since the accident. I made mistakes that night, she said firmly. Serious ones. I lied to Heather. I drank alcohol. I went off with a boy I barely knew. None of that was Heather's fault. And by placing all the blame on her, you've kept me from having to grow up and take responsibility for my own actions. You've treated me like a victim, not a person with agency who made bad choices. The meeting was emotionally exhausting, but it was only the beginning. Dr. Simmons suggested we continue with family therapy sessions once a week, while Rachel and I maintained our individual and joint sessions as well. Progress was slow and non-linear. There were setbacks, like the time my father lapsed into his old pattern of talking about me as if I weren't present, or the holiday dinner where my mother broke down sobbing when Rachel declined her help cutting her food. But there were moments of genuine connection too. My father helped us find and furnish a ground-floor apartment that was fully accessible for Rachel. My mother started asking me questions about my life, my job, my interests, things she had shown no curiosity about for years. The most significant breakthrough came 6 months after our initial confrontation. Rachel had decided to apply to community college, inspired by seeing me finally return to finish my degree. She asked our father to help her register for classes online. "I'm proud of you," he told her. Then, turning to me, he added, "Both of you. I'm proud of both of you." It was such a simple statement, but I had waited 11 years to hear it. I excused myself to the bathroom where I cried for 10 minutes straight, tears of relief, of release, of a burden finally beginning to lift. That night, Rachel and I talked until dawn about everything and nothing, just like we used to when we were kids. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive them completely?" she asked as the first light of morning crept through our blinds. I considered the question carefully. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm working on it. But I do know I don't want to be defined by anger and resentment any more than I wanted to be defined by guilt. So I'm trying." She nodded, understanding. "Me too. And Heather. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when it would have been easier to walk away." "I could say the same to you," I replied, squeezing her hand. "We're in this together now. No more secrets, no more unequal burden sharing. Just two sisters figuring it out as we go." For the first time in 11 years, that felt like enough. 1 year after discovering the police report, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. I had completed my long-delayed bachelor's degree in psychology, inspired by my own journey through therapy. Rachel was thriving in her second semester of community college, studying web design, a field that allowed her to work around her physical limitations. We still shared an apartment, though we had both gained a new independence. Rachel had become involved in a support group for young adults with acquired disabilities, where she had made friends who understood her specific challenges. I had started a similar group for siblings of trauma survivors, creating the supportive community I had needed for so many years. You should have seen this one guy's face when I told him it wasn't his fault his brother got hurt, I told Rachel over dinner one evening. It was like watching someone put down a 100-pound backpack they'd been carrying for years. "Sounds familiar," Rachel said with a small smile. "Sometimes I still catch myself thinking that way, that if I hadn't gone to that party, if I hadn't lied to you, everything would be different. But then I remember what Dr. Simmons said about parallel universes. Dr. Simmons had introduced us to the concept during a particularly difficult session, when we were both struggling with a what-if thinking. We can imagine countless parallel universes where different choices led to different outcomes, she had explained. But we only live in this one. And in this one, we can only move forward from where we are, not from where we wish we could be. That philosophy had become something of a mantra for both of us. We couldn't change the past, couldn't erase the accident, or the years of misplaced blame that followed. But we could choose how to live now, in this universe, with the truth finally acknowledged. Our relationship with our parents continued to evolve. There were still moments of tension, still old patterns that emerged under stress. But there was progress too, genuine efforts at connection that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. My father had started attending a support group for parents of children with disabilities, where he was finally confronting his own unprocessed grief about Rachel's accident. My mother had begun volunteering at a rehabilitation center, helping families navigate the overwhelming bureaucracy of medical care. Dad called me yesterday, I told Rachel. Just to chat. No crisis, no Rachel-related logistics to discuss. He asked about my job and actually listened to the answer. Progress, Rachel said approvingly. Slow but real. The most significant change, though, was in how I viewed myself. For 11 years, I had defined myself by a single moment of poor judgment and its catastrophic aftermath. I had believed I didn't deserve happiness, success, or love because of what had happened to Rachel. Now, I was learning to separate my identity from that night, to see myself as a whole person with strengths and flaws, successes and failures. I had started dating again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Mark, the man I had been seeing for the past 3 months, knew the full story of my family history, and didn't see me as defined by it. You're not responsible for carrying everyone else's pain, he had told me on our 3rd date. That doesn't mean you don't care. It just means you recognize the boundaries of your own responsibility. Rachel, too, was establishing a new relationship with her disability. Rather than seeing it solely as a tragedy that had happened to her, she had begun to incorporate it into her identity in a way that acknowledged both its challenges and the strength she had developed in facing them. I'm thinking about starting a blog, she announced one evening. About navigating college as a wheelchair user. Not inspiration porn, she added quickly, but practical stuff. Things I wish someone had told me. That's a great idea, I encouraged her. You have insights that could really help people. I was also thinking about writing about that night, she said more hesitantly. About the accident and everything that came after. About how our family fell apart, and how we're putting it back together. Would that be okay with you? I considered the question carefully. A year ago, the idea of our private family trauma being exposed would have horrified me. Now, I saw the potential value in sharing our story. I think it could help a lot of people, I said finally. Families dealing with blame and secrets after a tragedy. Siblings carrying guilt that isn't fully theirs. As long as you tell the whole truth, not just the parts that are easy to share. The whole truth, Rachel agreed. No more secrets. As I reflect on the journey that brought us here, I'm struck by how a single document, a police report filed 11 years ago, could have such a profound impact on so many lives. The truth had always been there, waiting to be discovered. But it took courage to seek it out, even more courage to confront it, and the most courage of all to rebuild our lives around it. The guilt I carried for 11 years hasn't completely vanished. I still have moments where I wonder if things might have been different if I had made a different choice that night. But those moments no longer define me. They're just one part of a much larger story, a story that includes growth, resilience, forgiveness, and hope. If you're carrying a burden of guilt or shame that feels too heavy to bear, I encourage you to question it. Ask yourself if the weight is truly yours to carry, or if you've been convinced to shoulder blame that should be more widely shared. The truth can be painful, but living with lies, even comfortable, familiar lies, ultimately costs more than facing reality. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew about yourself or your family? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding freedom through truth. Remember, sharing your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to find the courage to seek their own truth. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find healing in whatever struggles you may be facing.